will tell you one thing that happened was one of his teachers earlier on was his special ed teacher when he was in second grade really also believed in inclusion, and then when Tim was in fifth grade, she on her own went to the administration and said, and she changed. She was a dual major. She was dual degree, so she could either teach special ed or regular ed. And so she became a regular ed teacher, and then teamed up her classroom with a special ed teacher who was interested. And so they did not have a separate class. They had two teachers in one classroom. But unfortunately, what happened? It was chaos, because then what happened was all the other teachers, the rest of the school, said, well, this kid is a problem, so they should go in that classroom. And so they took all the kids that had challenges and put them in that classroom. And I mean, when you look at inclusion, if you look at true inclusion, it's like 2% of the population are people with disabilities, so 2% of your classroom should be disabilities. Well, this was about 50-50. And it didn't last because it didn't work.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that still goes on today, and I call it dumping. And what they do is they call these classes inclusion classes. So basically, everybody with an IEP goes to, it's usually one or two classes. When you're in a large district for a grade, they'll have one or two classes, but they dump every IEP there. And I mean, I'm not saying every school district does this. I know my school district does. I know several around me do, but that's called dumping. And yeah, that's not inclusion. Inclusion should be proportionate, like you just said, which is about in a school, it's about 15%, give or take. 12 to 15% of your students are going to have an IEP. So that's the proportion you should have in a class. And I've been saying that for years. So
that makes me really sad to hear you say that, because this was back in early 1990s, and I'm sad to hear that there's not been more change. And also, I will tell you that, like, in some of the occasions when we would go to people and talk about inclusion, kind of versus mainstreaming, or they used to call that main dumping, where you'd pull them out for library or something. But anyway, some of the special ed teachers would feel threatened. They would feel like their jobs were threatened. But the whole idea, if people really looked at the idea of inclusion, it's that idea of a regular ed teacher working in conjunction with a special ed teacher in one setting, that they're both equally necessary. And, I hated to see anyone who felt threatened by, well, if we do inclusion, then I don't have a job. Of course you have a job. You can't do this without you, right?
Of course you have a job.
Right.
And you should be able to walk in a class and not be able to, if it's a co-taught class, not be able to tell who's the general ed teacher and who's the special ed teacher.
Right.
They should be,
Don't you think
that's how it should be.
The school's money, if they were to actually really do that?
Well, no, it actually costs, what happens is that they don't want to pay for two teachers in as many classes as need two teachers. And that's the reason they don't have enough co-taught. They've pulled the co-taught classrooms, many of them in my district, for budget reasons.
Oh,
so it costs money. And again, I'm not picking on my district because I have a great administration. I'm just saying in general, this happens across the country.
Well, and you're talking about what
in general.
There's challenges from all perspectives.
Right. Yeah, but you're exactly right. That's the way it should be done, but it's not the way it is done. So
I like to use the word could be.
Could be. I like that. We could be. And it is being done in some places. There are some wonderful districts around the country that are doing that. And
I will tell you, like, for the parents whose this subject really reaches them, those are the people who are doing that are probably the people who will be speaking on it at the national convention. So you would get the latest and greatest on what those school districts are doing, what's working, what's not, and you can take that home with you. I mean, that was very encouraging for us all through Tim's education, was being able to go and see what other people are doing and taking it back to the schools.
That's exactly right. And one little tip that I believe in is I put no pullouts in my daughter's IEP, so that when they dumped her in these inclusion classes and the special ed teacher pulled all the IEPs out, my daughter actually got real inclusion because she was the only IEP left in the class. So at least she got the general ed instruction and she benefited. But it's sad that we have to do stuff like that. Very sad.
Love is all around. Love is a